Welcome to HosPortal V2, our brand new rostering software. This video provides a guide to what's new and different to allow you to get started. V2 is a completely new version of our rostering software, built entirely from the ground up. It's more powerful, more flexible, and makes some functions much easier to use. It also sets the foundations for us to be more responsive in the future. Many of the features and functions in V2 are the same as the ones you are used to. Generally, we think you should be able to do most things you are used to doing today without needing any special training. But to get the full value from V2, there are some other features and changes that might take a little bit of getting used to. This video covers each of the major things we think you might want to know. We'll put some dividers in the video to make it easier for you to scan forward to find the bits you're more interested in. There are also some help pages available via the Help button. Included in our help pages is a description of how we migrate your existing information from the current HosPortal into V2. Because V2 is completely new software with new functionality, we could not just copy it as it is. So with that context, let's now just dive in. The dashboard is similar to what you're already used to. What used to be called Notify is now called Direct Message. The admin page is now more powerful. Many of the configuration settings that were buried in other places throughout HosPortal have been consolidated here. Later in this video, we'll go into more detail on the admin page. In the old HosPortal, all the shifts were either in a group called Call or Allocations. Each type of roster had different functions and features. One of the big changes in V2 is that you can have as many of these roster groupings as you like, call them what you like, and give them distinguishing features like colours and icons. All of them now have the same complete set of powerful features if you want them, such as complete change logs, colour coding and shift swapping functions, which used to be only available to call rosters, or locations, week names and multi-person staffing patterns, which used to be available only in allocations. Looking around the dashboard, the Shifts of Today panel is now configurable regarding the amount and type of information everyone will see on their homepage. The biggest change for administrators in V2 on the dashboard is the new admin dashboard, only visible to people with admin permissions. Here you will see a list of items that administrators often focus on. Leave requests that have not yet been processed, shifts that break one of the rostering rules. You will already be set up with the rules as they were in the old HosPortal, such as warnings when a user is staffed on 2 clinical allocations during the same session. But you can now also define more complex and sophisticated rules across any types of shifts, all through the admin page. Vacant shifts. In HosPortal V2, we've standardised the terminology for shifts that do not have the required staffing and called them vacant. This is what the old HosPortal used to call unallocated. You can see all the vacant shifts in one place here. HosPortal V2 now allows administrators to see a consolidated list of shifts on the market. A completely new function for HosPortal V2 is the ability to set approval rules for shift swaps and transfers, which is the shift change request. It used to be that you could allow call shifts to be swapped or not. Now you can set rules that adds an additional type of shift transfer, where people can request a change that needs to be approved and can be applied to any type of duty, not just on call shifts. Unacknowledged reminders are for communications where you want the user to acknowledge them and they have not yet responded. You might use this to get users to respond to shift reminders or get them to acknowledge shifts they've been assigned as part of a self-rostering process. And finally, pending users are the people who have been invited to HosPortal but have not yet activated their login. The way you look at rosters in HosPortal V2 is more flexible. Because there is no fundamental difference in the way we treat call, allocations, or any of the other roster groupings that you might create, all of these options are available on any page where you can see the rosters. Looking at this allocations page, you'll see there's a new highlight button. You can highlight vacant shifts, such as this obstetric activity or these pre-admission clinic activities. You can highlight shifts that break one of the rostering rules. And so in this particular case, this person is staffed in 2 locations at the same time, or this person is on leave whilst they're staffed. Or in this particular case with this blue icon, it shows that this particular person has been allocated to a shift where they don't have the requisite or default skills or team membership that you would expect for that roster. And if I was logging in as a doctor or a user who's staffed on one of these shifts, I can highlight my own shifts. Whilst the various elements are highlighted, you can still edit them, or you can edit the shifts that are not highlighted. You can also create more and more varied view settings and save them for later use. Each view is bespoke. If you want to view only certain locations or view them in a certain order, you and all your users can now do that rather than rely on settings set by HosPortal or the administrators. Administrators can also define views that everyone else has access to. We encourage you to play with the view settings to find out the ones that work for you and your facilities. Some of the things that might be helpful is if you're used to using roster tags, they're now part of the roster filters. So you can filter the rosters that you want to look at within the roster settings. You can set up identical views that only differ by the type of person that you show. It might be that you like a particular layout, but you want one view that just shows the radiologists and the other view that just shows the sonographers, for instance. You might want to use a roster view on your allocations page. In this way, you can group all activity of a similar nature, even if they happen in different locations and different days. We encourage you to think about the way you like to see your rosters and then save the settings you like. Once you've saved the settings, they're accessible from a menu, and by selecting the Manage Views, you can edit them, you can delete them, and you will be able to reorder them. Before we leave the allocations page, I'll just point out another thing that's new to HosPortal V2, which is your ability to colour code rosters the same way you used to be able to do on the call page. Here, this particular hospital has coloured their ortho lists red and their neuro lists green, and the rest of the shifts have adopted the standard default allocations colour of light blue. This becomes a bit more apparent if I use one of the views I've saved previously, which is a roster-based view, which takes exactly the same information and now shows it roster by roster. And so something like my ortho activity, which happens in 2 different locations with different people, are now shown together. So it makes it easier for me to identify those. The same way, my neuro activity is highlighted separately in this particular row down here. The other thing you can do on all roster pages now is have a look at shift statistics. These statistics, if I click on this button, will show the amount of activity across those rosters that are visible on my shifts page. So this is a particular view with a particular set of rosters, particular roles, and particular locations that I've filtered for. And then when I click on the statistics, it will show me all the activity over those particular rosters that I've chosen, and I can select the date range and change the date range as I like. I've mentioned a couple of times that we've now broken down the distinction between call and allocations rosters. It's worth going into a little bit more detail now about how that works in practice. So the first thing that's important to note is that every shift is now part of what we call a roster. So it used to be on the call page, every shift was part of an explicit roster, like first on call. But now you might take what might be a dozen different orthopaedic surgical sessions over different locations and different days of the 4-week cycle and aggregate those into a single orthopaedic roster. some of this information is optional, but it's available to everything. So it used to be that allocations typically had a location, which you could not apply to a call. Whereas now you can apply a location to a call roster or a call shift if you'd like. And finally, we've made it possible to have complex combinations of staff that have to fill a particular duty or a shift. So in this particular case, there's a consultant and a registrar, each of which fills what we call a slot. But you could have many slots, a surgeon, an anaesthetist, and 2 nurses. And for each of those slots, you can define the type of person it needs to be, the skills they need to have, and whether they need to be a member of a particular team that you set up. Something you can also do is move them around on the screen. So if you want to see a particular person first in the list, you can do that. It used to be, as an administrator, if you want to edit shifts, you first needed to click the edit button. In HosPortal V2, that's no longer the case. You can edit directly by clicking onto a shift, and you can even make multiple edits before you close the pop-up editing window. More simply, you can use the Fill Shift button. This button will automatically fill vacant shifts, or if you add someone or you add an additional person to an already filled shift, it will add an additional slot automatically. You now use the Edit button only for more involved changes to your roster. That's where you can see the underlying templates, which would otherwise be hidden. You can add ad hoc shifts outside the template pattern by pressing the green plus button. You can edit multiple slots at the same time or multiple people at the same time. So I can select multiple people and bulk edit them by changing the user, adding additional person, or marking those particular slots vacant. I can put vacant shifts on the market for others to pick up. This replaces and combines the volunteer function from the old call page and the available sessions function from the old allocations page. You can now draft or publish an entire page, or by using these 3 buttons, you can draft or publish just a column, for instance this day, or just a row, for instance this AM session for Theatre 1. If I look at the way I might now use my templates and publish my templates, I now have the option to publish directly from the template. It used to be I had to draft first and then publish second. But now when I select publish, it asks me, do I want the templates to be published or only the drafts? Here I want the templates to be published. If I select that, it identifies that in these templates are people who are on leave. And it asks me what I want to do with those people who are on leave. Do I create the shifts with Dr. Kildare in them, knowing that the shifts are being filled by somebody who's on leave? Do I take Dr. Kildare off, populate them with a vacant slot? Or do I just ignore them and not publish them and leave them blank so they're not part of my roster at all? Here, I'm going to mark them as vacant. Now that whole day is published and those 2 slots where the person was on leave are marked as vacant. When I edit a shift and look at the different categories, the categories, now down the left-hand side of the panel, are slightly different. What used to be call is now called conflict, in that it identifies any person who would break one of the rostering rules that you've set up. And what used to be called unavailable is now broken into 2 categories, unavailable and no template. Unavailable is for users who are definitively not able to do that shift. It might be because they're excluded from the roster, or they have a staffing template that explicitly states they're not able or not available to be staffed. No template is for those people where there's really no information about how someone is staffed at this time. People in this category are typically part-time staff on their day off, or VMOs or contractors, where they're not explicitly due to be staffed on that particular time. Something that I know many of our customers have been looking forward to, there is now available for every slot and every roster a more complete change log. Every edit under Show History shows all the changes to that particular slot, such as changing the person, changing the time they're working, or even changing from draft to published. All of these are now available for administrators to review. What used to be called the Notify page is now called the Direct Message page. There are three notable changes. One, you can create a phone book on the admin page of regular contacts, who are people who aren't HosPortal users, but people you might contact outside HosPortal on a regular basis. Secondly, the track function is now more sophisticated in tracking all emails and all text messages over any period of time. And finally, in addition to the ability to send to those people on a particular, eligible to be on a particular roster, you can now select those people on a particular roster or able to work on an individual day. So by leaving this blank and selecting those people working today, I've selected anyone on any roster today or tomorrow or on a date that I choose. HosPortal already has the ability to define skills that might be required for staffing types of shifts. For instance, consultants with a paediatric skill. It now adds a new structure called Teams. Skills and Teams are both accessible from the admin page. The Skills menu allows you to define the skills and what roles they apply to. And the new Teams function is accessible on the Teams menu to define hierarchies of teams. So it might be that you want to allocate people to a red team and a blue team, or you might divide your physicians into general medicine and into various different subspecialties. When you apply these to an individual, you can apply them on an individual's profile. I can see that Beverly Crusher is part of the medicine team. I can see that James Kildare has the neuro skill and is part of the blue team. If I click into James Kildare, I can have a look at his skills and teams and I can adjust their dates. So it might be the particular skill, the accreditation ends on a particular date. Or the team membership ends on a particular date and I can add a new team starting in the future. We've now made it much easier for administrators to manage their site all in one place on this administration page, rather than looking for settings where they might be buried in individual call types or in various different other places around HosPortal. We've also made it easier to define common activities, such as setting reminders or rostering rules, by setting one rule that applies to many rosters or an entire roster group, rather than having to edit each individual call type separately. We've written a separate help file to guide you through this admin page, but I'll explain some things that are particularly new and particularly helpful. Site holidays are ones you can now set yourself rather than having to contact us at HosPortal. So you can add and remove shutdown days and set regional holidays if you wish. The dashboard setting allows you to configure what's seen on the Shifts of Today panel on everyone's homepage. Permission groups. Even we admit that permissions were hard to manage in the old HosPortal. We now have a simpler approach to defining permission groups and then assigning roles or individuals to these groups. Skills and teams. We've spoken about this more detail earlier in this video. Shift change request rules. It used to be that you could either turn shift swaps on or off for a particular call roster. You can now create more nuanced rules across different rosters and roster groups. And there's a new setting to allow people to request a change that needs an administrator to approve. Shift separation rules define whether users will be marked as having a conflict. Rules can now consider any roster in any roster group and use a wide variety of conflict rules. In the old HosPortal, this was limited to some rules about allocations after night shifts or overlapping shifts. Even though this is more powerful and useful now, we aim to expand this in future to reflect staffing awards and overstaffing rules based on the number of hours people are working. And leave request rules. These allow you to define rules to automatically approve certain types of leave or prohibit certain types of leave. For instance, you can auto-approve consultant leave that's more than 3 months in the future, or prohibit anyone else from applying for leave over the New Year period. I hope you found this introduction to HosPortal V2 helpful as a guide to get you started and transitioning from the existing software to our new, more powerful and more flexible rostering software. Please use the help button to get in touch to ask any questions, and if you're using a trial version of the software, feel free to make any changes you like as they won't reflect on your actual rostering data.